What's up, guys? Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be talking about the sorc tank. Sorcerers do make fairly decent tanks. This build is more geared towards 4-man content than 12-man content, so like trials and stuff, but you can still complete vet trials with a sorc tank. I've seen it done. But you will have to work a little bit harder compared to Dragonite and Warden tanks, just because sorcs don't really have the same tanking utility abilities in their arsenal as the DKs or the Wardens do. Their passives don't really line up very well with tanking, and their abilities kind of don't really lend themselves too much when it comes to utility, so there is that. But sorc tanks can still make very good tanks. It's just a matter of learning the fights and learning how to use your class to the best of its ability here. So just like our other build videos, we'll be going over gear, our attributes, our CP point distributions, our skills, and unlike our DPS videos, because tanks don't really have any sort of rotation, I'll just be going over kind of what I do and what I look for in a sorc tank, kind of what your prioritization should be depending on the fight and things like that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our gear first. So sorcs, basically, unlike DKs and Wardens, the other three classes, sorcs, Templars, and Nightblades, they don't have the equivalent of Dragonite chains. So for this reason, a lot of tanks that are in these three classes use Swarm Mothers. Swarm Mothers comes from, I believe, Spindle Clutch 1. When you block an attack from an enemy that's further than 5 meters from you, you spin strands of Spider Silk to pull the enemy to you. This effect can occur once every 1 second. So this basically is the replacement for Unrelenting Grip and Frozen Portal. So the one thing to keep in mind is that this is obviously only going to be useful for trash pulls or pulls where you have ads. And it's not going to be quite as useful as Dragonite chains. So for example, against Zasasha, the first boss of Maw of Lorcage, he summons cats that can't be taunted, and so because they're not going to be attacking you and because they don't have any ranged attacks, you won't be able to chain them like a Dragonite tank would be able to in order to get them off of your healers or your DPS. So while Swarm Mothers is a good replacement, it is not the perfect replacement for chains, and that's kind of why sorc, Templars, and Nightblade tanks generally aren't used as much in trials, just because they lack that utility of pulling a ranged enemy over. That being said, though, Swarm Mothers is very useful for 4-man content because there's not that many instances where you will have a untauntable melee ad that you can't necessarily chain in. For our first 5-piece, we're going with Ebon. Ebon is the tried and true and the staple for any tank in the game, because it gives your group additional max health. This max health is also boosted a little bit by any sort of passives that you might have, so it's going to be a little bit more than the 1100 or so health that it's given your friends. If you don't have Ebon, or if you're running a vet trial with 2 tanks and the other tank already has Ebon, you can use something like Plague Doctors or Green Pact or Warrior Poet if you'd like. That's just because Ebon, the 5-piece, doesn't stack on each other, so you can only really have one Ebon set active in the group. Unless, of course, your group is split up. So, for example, in Hellrot Citadel, when you split into 2 groups, then yes, you can continue to wear Ebon that way. But if your other tank is wearing Ebon, then you can go ahead and use a more selfish set like Plague Doctors in order to help your survivability. Also, Ebon's not quite as useful in instances where you have a solo sustain. So, for example, Dragonstar Arena's final boss, or if you're off tanking in a VSO, so like the Ozara ads or the Serpent against you're tanking the Manticora and the Serpent. In those instances, Ebon's not going to be quite as strong because you're going to want more health in order to be better off sustaining. So in that case, you would replace Ebon with Plague Doctor. For our second 5-piece, this is going to be the utility set here. We're going with Alkosh. Alkosh is obviously the best debuff set in the game, because not only does it give you the debuff from the 5-piece, but you can also combine it with an Infused Torug's Crusher, like we have Infused Crusher, I should say, like we have here, for even more of a debuff here. So because Alkosh is a medium armor set, we're going with 3 jewelry pieces and then a sword and board on both bars here. I have Dual Wield here, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But for our jewelry enchants, because they changed the way block the block reduction is calculated. Shield play is not necessarily going to be the best in all scenarios. In some instances you will want to use a reduced stamina cost enchant instead. So for here we're going with a much more balanced approach when it comes to our enchants. We're going with 2 shield play and a reduced stamina cost enchant. However, you can go all 3 shield play enchants. That's still going to give you the best return reduction when it comes to your block cost. So don't feel like you have to use a reduced stamina cost here, but this is going to be helpful for a sustain if you have to use Heroic Slash, Pierce Armor, and other stamina abilities as well. Now for our sword, our weapons, for our front bar we're having a sword and shield. Doesn't have to be a sword, it can be any one-hander, infused with the Crusher enchant, and then obviously a shield. I'll talk about armor traits and enchants in a little bit. And then for our back bar here, you do have a couple of options here, so I'm using Dual Wield here, and that's just for the Deadly Cloak. But you can go with another one-handed shield if you'd like. You can go with the Lightning Staff, you can go with a bow if you'd like. It's kind of up to you what you want to do. So if you are going to be doing something like Dual Wield back here, you're going to want to replace one of these enchants with a weakening enchant, and I would probably just keep a Crusher enchant here. You can probably replace it with another enchant if you would like, something like let's say Absorb Stamina in order to help out your stamina sustain, or even Absorb Magicka or something. But since you're not going to be on your back bar for all that long, it's not quite as important to have different enchants here. So if anything, I would just double up on a Crusher enchant here, just so you have a better uptime on your Crusher enchant. But again, you can go with like a Lightning Staff, you can go with another Sword and Shield, you can go with a bow. It's kind of up to you, and I'll talk about that when we go over our skill bars. Now for our armor traits and enchants, for our large pieces I'm going with Infused with a prismatic enchant. So that's for all of my large pieces, so that's head, chest, legs, and shield. For our small, we're going with Sturdy with health enchants here. Depending on your race, you might need to play around a little bit with your enchants here. Try to play around with the small enchants first, and try to do a little bit with your attributes as well. A general rule of thumb here is going to be to make sure your stamina is always going to be above your Magicka pools, so that's kind of what you want to shoot for here. And then for our shields, same thing, prismatic enchants. You can go with actually all sturdy if you'd like, if you feel like you need a little bit more help with sustain. It's kind of up to you with your tanking style specifically. So one other thing I want to mention here is that you do have other options besides Alkosh, because Alkosh does come from Modular Kosh, so you do need to have access to ESO Plus or the Thieves Guild DLC in order to get it. You can go with Torug's Pact, which is a crafted set. It requires 3 pieces to 3 traits research in order to craft it, so it's pretty easy to get. It's very nice to have. You just make sure to use a Crusher enchant on there. If you are going to be using Torug's Pact, because it is a crafted set and we don't have jewelry crafting out just yet, you're going to want to use Ebon jewelry here instead. There has been gold Ebon jewelry sold on the Golden Vendor, but it is not tradable, so if you missed out on it, then you're just going to have to wait for it to come back into the rotation. Otherwise, you're just going to have to go with purple Ebon jewelry for now. And then you just used basically Torug's Pact Sword and Shield, and then the 3-piece Torug's Pact on your body here, and then 2-piece Ebon on your body here as well. If you don't want to use Torug's Pact, or if you want to use a different set alongside Torug's Pact or Alkosh, you can also go with Akaviri Dragonguard. Dragonguard, let's see if I should have a piece here. So Dragonguard here basically reduces the cost of ultimate by 15%. Because sorcs already have reduced ultimate cost, this brings it down even further. I believe your Warhorn ends up being like 196-ish ultimate, which is pretty good. So you can get a lot higher Warhorn uptime if you have a sorc tank and pair that with Akaviri Dragonguard. That's another potential option there for you to choose from. If you are going to go with Dragonguard, though, I would recommend going with jewelry, because the 5-piece reduction in your ultimate cost doesn't change based on the quality of your jewelry. So purple will be exactly the same as gold. So just go with purple jewelry instead to save yourself some money and some time. You're not really going to see that much of an increase if you're going with gold jewelry of the dragon, because that just boosts the max health. And the other 2, 3, 4 piece healing taken isn't affected by quality. It's always going to be 4%. And then Magicka regen, you're only going to see a difference of 2 or 3 in Magicka regen, and health, same thing, maybe like 10 to 20 additional max health. So it's just better off to go cheap and go with the purple jewelry here. And then finally, a couple of other options for your monster helm sets. You can go with Bloodspawn, you can go with Thurvokun, or you can go with Lord Warden. It's going to depend on the situation specifically. Bloodspawn is very good if you want more ulti read and if you want to have higher Warhorn uptime. As a sorc tank though, your base Warhorn cost is going to be 213 without Dragonguard, so you're already going to have pretty good uptime on there. So Bloodspawn's not quite as strong on a sorc tank just because they do have that 50% ultimate cost reduction built into their class passives. Lord Warden's going to be a lot better, and it's going to provide, in my opinion, a little bit more group utility. It helps boost your resistances with the 1-piece, and the 2-piece, basically, it's going to be active all the time. It's a 50% chance to proc whenever you take damage, so that's a pretty good proc chance, and it boosts the spell and physical resistance of everybody around you within 8 meters by almost 4k, so that's really nice to help out your stamina, survivability, and the less they die, the more DPS they can do, so the faster the fight will end, and the less stress it is on you as the tank. So Lord Warden's pretty strong. I have a monster helm set there, and I don't believe actually I might have, let's see, Thurvokun, is it U or is it O? Okay, so don't have Thurvokun here. Okay, and then the final set that you can choose from is Thurvokun. So this comes from, I believe it is Fanglair. So this, you do need to have Dragonbones DLC in order to get it. And the 2-piece is what's really powerful here, and it's going to be mostly used for trash pulls. It's not really going to be used for single target boss fights. So you can see here when an enemy damages you, you summon a pool of desecrated bile for 8 seconds. Enemies in the bile receive X amount of disease damage every 1 second and are afflicted with minor maim, minor defile. Reducing their damage done and healing receive a 15%. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds. So this basically it's always going to be up, and in trash pulls it acts as an AoE minor maim. Because sorcs don't have access to a equivalent of like choking talons, which is another AoE minor maim that's exclusive to Dragon Knights. Thurvokun is a very, very powerful monster helm set to use in trash pulls, like VSO or Maw of Lorcage or Halls of Fabrication, where the ads are almost quite as dangerous as the ad pulls can be quite as dangerous as the bosses themselves. So Thurvokun's a really nice set to have on hand. Get rid of this. Alright, so that's all the gear stuff out of the way. So now we're just go over the secondary stuff, so race and things like that. So I am an Imperial here, but realistically you can go with really any class, or any race I should say. I've seen people tank on Khajiits, I've seen people tank on Altmers, and they've all been very successful. As a tank and as a support role, it's a lot more about how well you can learn the mechanics, how well you can learn your class, your role, how well you can support the group, and that's not necessarily race exclusive. Now, Imperials are very good because they have additional health and stamina. There are a couple of other races that are more inclined for the tanking position. Argonians are a good choice. They have max health, they have additional healing received, and they have a little bit of additional max magicka, so you will need to take a look at stamina and play around with that because they don't have any additional max stamina there. And they have a potion passive, which boosts the amount of resources that you get back whenever you drink a potion, any potion. So that's just something you want to keep in mind if you're going to go with an Argonian. Another potential option for sorc for tanks are going to be Redguard. They get a lot of additional stamina. They don't get any max health or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about your stamina ever being lower than your magicka as a Redguard. Plus, you get additional stamina back for every melee attack you do every 6 seconds, so that's nice to help out your stamina sustain as well. And then another kind of overlooked race that I feel like is potentially very good is Dark Elves, because they get 9% max magicka and 6% max stamina. They don't get any additional health damage. You do have additional elemental damage, which you're not really going to be able to take advantage of, so that's kind of a waste of a racial passive. However, the additional boost to magicka and stamina, I believe they're actually the only race that has boost to both of them, makes them pretty versatile as a tank, because you will need to rely on your magicka and stamina both as a tank. So I feel like Dark Elves are kind of the dark horse when it comes to races in tanking. For our attribute points, I'm dumping all my points into health, 64 points into health. For vet trials, you're going to want to be sitting at about 35k health, so you don't necessarily need to put this many points into health. You can actually take them out, especially as an Imperial, because you do have 12% additional max health. So if you want, you can take points out of health, put them into stamina and magicka to help it sustain a little bit. The magic number to hit is going to be 35k with food. So you can see here, I can probably take out like 32 points and put 16 and 16 into magicka and stamina even, and still be sitting at probably around 36k health, and that's with Ebon as well. So that's kind of the health threshold that I recommend going for vet trials, around 36k or 35k with Ebon. Obviously with Plague you will see a much larger boost. You'll be probably sitting at about 45k with Ebon or with Plague Doctor. So just play around with your attributes, see what works for you. A lot of tanks nowadays aren't necessarily putting 64 points into health, but again, those are also tanks that kind of know what they're doing, they know the fights, they know how to tank. So if you're just learning how to tank vet trials, I would recommend putting more points into health compared to stamina and magicka, until at least you get to learn how to better sustain your resources that way. And for the Mundustone, we're going with the Atronach. We want additional magicka regen because a lot of our buffs do come from abilities that use magicka, so we want more magicka more often. And for food, we're going with purple food, which boosts our health, magicka, and stamina. So this is all crafted food. You don't need any sort of DLCs or anything like that in order to get that food. Now for our skills. Now we do have several flex spots here, so I'll go over each of our flex spots once we get to them. So our first ability is obviously going to be our Taunt, Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, must have. Empowered Ward is the shield that you're going to want to use. Go with Empowered, not Hardened, and I'll talk about this in a little bit. Balance, this is going to be pretty important for Sustain. This combined with another Sorc ability is going to be responsible for our basically infinite Sustain as a Sorc tank. So definitely pick up Balance if you can. Absorb Magic, we have this here for the additional passives for the amount you can block and the cost of blocking. Then we have Replenishing Barrier here. This is kind of a flex spot. You have several options when it comes to which ultimate you want to use down here. Now for our backbar, we have our Ranged Taunt, Inner Rage. We have Dark Deal. This is combined with Balance, going to be responsible for pretty much our amazing sustain on a Sorc tank. There is a cast time associated with it, so you're going to want to be careful when you use Dark Deal. So you obviously don't want to use it when the boss is charging a heavy attack. You're going to want to be able to time this so you're able to get it off and raise your block again, because you can't block while you're casting. Restraining Prison, this is basically going to be a replacement for Choking Talons on a Dragon Knight. So you basically immobilize enemies in front of you for 5 seconds. The area itself actually isn't that terrible. The only problem is it is a cast in front of you rather than all around you compared to Talon, so you are going to have to direct where Restraining Prison is going to be facing. It also has a slow for about 6.5 seconds afterwards, so that's really nice to have in order for additional CCs and kind of protect your DPS. Deadly Cloak, this is a flex spot. Actually, this is also a flex spot here, Restraining Prison. Deadly Cloak is another flex spot. This is because we have Dual Wield. This is here for the reduction in AoE damage by 25%. Very useful to have, and it also helps proc our enchant while we're on our front bar because it does count as a weapon damage ability. So for every 3 seconds, you have a chance of proccing Crusher. So this really helps out with maintaining your Crusher uptime and your enchant uptimes in general. And then Purge, this is another flex spot. We have this here mainly for the magicka regen from the support line under magicka aid. You have 5% with the first level and then 10% with the second level. So that's why we have Purge, but this is a flex spot. And then Aggressive Warhorn is our ultimate. This is a must-have for any tank if you want to do endgame content. Now for our a little bit of reasoning first behind our skills. Why we don't have Hardened Ward here. It's just because Empowered Ward gives minor intellect to you and your allies for 10 seconds, which boosts your magic regen. So we want to give, remember, we want to provide as much utility as we can to our group as a tank, so that's why we're running Empowered Ward instead. Even though Harden does give us a larger shield, but let me see, I believe it's a 33% additional shield. Yes, so 33% on top of 7k or so. That's only roughly an additional 2k, so you're really only going to be getting about a 9k shield, 9.5k shield. Which isn't terrible, it's not bad, it will help you, but ultimately the minor intellect is going to be more useful for the group as a whole. We already talked about this. So Flex Ultimate here for Replenishing Barrier if you don't want to use this, this ultimate here. You can go with Suppression Field or Absorption Field, which doesn't really matter which morph you choose. Absorption is probably going to be a little bit better. This just helps, especially in Trash Pulls, it stuns everybody within it for the duration of the ultimate, so 12 seconds, so that's really, really helpful for Trash Pulls, especially in dungeons. And it also displaces any sort of, so basically dispels any AoEs that are already placed down. So it's useful to have, for example, in against the Stone Atronach, when you have those AoEs placed down on your group when you're stacked together, it's useful to have this there to get rid of it. Doesn't stun, obviously, the boss, but it helps you out. Plus, Absorption Field also heals you by a fairly decent amount. It's 1k heal every half second, so it's about 2ks every second. So that helps out a little bit with your healing and kind of puts a little bit of pressure off of your healers. But don't necessarily depend on it because it is a fairly high cost ultimate, 192 ultimate, as you can see here. Another potential ultimate you can use is actually the Sword and Board ultimate on your front bar here. So you can go with Shield Wall, or Shield Discipline, or Spell Wall. Doesn't really matter which morph. Generally speaking, Shield Discipline is going to be more useful because then you can basically taunt and use your Heroic Slash to basically at no cost. So people generally choose the Shield Discipline ultimate. However, Spell Wall is also not a bad ultimate because it reflects all projectiles cast at you. So it's kind of up to you which morph you choose. I personally go with Spell Wall, but you can go with Shield Discipline. It's personal preference, really. Now for our 3 flex spots on the back here. So if you're running a Lightning staff, you're going to want to go with Elemental Blockade here instead of Deadly Cloak. If you're running a bow, you're going to want to go Endless Hail instead of Deadly Cloak. So that's kind of your options here if you're not using the typical double Sword and Board. If you are going with double Sword and Board, then this becomes just another random flex spot that you can take advantage of. So for your flex spots, you do have a couple of options here. So you can go with Boundless Storm. So this basically gives you Major Resolve and Major Ward. Remember that Balance also gives you Major Ward and Major Resolve, so it won't double up on each other, but Boundless Storm also gives you Major Expedition, which helps out if there are any sort of snaring effects that are placed on you by the boss and things like that. Let's see here. So for under Fighter skill, you can go with the Ring of Preservation or Turn Undead. This basically is a source of minor protection. This isn't going to be used too much. This is only going to be used mainly in execute phases for a couple of boss fights, Assembly General and Halls, the Mage, and it's just for the minor protection. It only affects 6 people at a time, so you and 5 others, so that's something to keep in mind, but it is a nice skill to have here. Sanguine Altar or Overflowing Altar, doesn't matter which morph. This is for the additional minor lifesteal, which heals you and your allies for 690 health every 1 second. If your healer's running it, obviously you don't have to run it as well, but it is nice to have a source of minor lifesteal that just helps your DPS survive a little bit more. You can go with Retreating Maneuver. You're not really going to use this too much. This is more for speedrun tactics. So if you need to, speed through a trial, then you're going to want to use this in one of your slots here. You're also going to want to consider using Echoing Vigor as well. You do have a heal associated with Dark Deal, but again, there's a cast time associated with it, so you're going to want to make sure to time it. Vigor, on the other hand, you can just hit it, and it just gives you a nice heal over time. It does cost stamina, so do keep that in mind. So you're obviously not going to want to use this as your primary heal, because you do want to consider your stamina for blocking. And under the support line, you do have Stalwart Guard. You do need to double bar this, so you will have to take off Purge and then maybe take off Balance or something in order to use Stalwart Guard. I generally only use this if I'm going with double Sword and Board, because that gives me 3 flex spots instead of 2 on the back here. So Stalwart Guard is pretty useful. You just guard your DPS and you give them minor force, which boosts their critical damage by 10%. So that's a really nice boost there. I also forgot here. So you can go with Bound Armaments here if you'd like. This boosts your max stamina and also gives you minor resolve as well, which boosts your physical resistances. So you can go with that. You can go with Bound Aegis too. It gives you both minor ward and minor resolve. So it boosts both of your resistances, but it increases your max magicka. So you want to be a little bit careful if you go with Bound Aegis, just because you obviously don't want your magicka to be above your stamina here. And just like with Stalwart Guard, you will need to double bar this as well. So you will need to replace this with a skill up here, typically Balance. So again, I would only use this if you're going with double sword and board, so that way you have you can use Boundless Storm in one of these flex spots, and then use Bound Armaments or Bound Aegis as a double bar here. And that's basically it for your flex spots there. So let's go over our champion points. So we're going to go through this really quickly, or try to go through this really quickly, because this video is getting a little bit long. So the CP cap is 720, which means you have 240 CP points put across each of the 3 different constellations. So starting off with our green CPs, we have 64 into Arcanist and Tenacity. Arcanist for the magic regen, Tenacity for the additional stamina when you heavy attack. It's going to be helpful for your sustain. We aren't hitting 75 here because we do want to conserve a couple of points for Shadow Ward over here. We have 56 into Shadow Ward to help reduce the cost of blocking. And the remaining points are in Tumbling, so I have 20 into Tumbling and 20 into Warlord. That helps conserve our stamina for those instances where you have to use Break Free or Dodge Roll, because again, we do want to conserve stamina for blocking. That's what our stamina is there for. For our blue CPs, very, very straightforward. So this is if you are a pure tank. If you're going, if this character is doubling as a DPS, obviously you're going to want to just do your typical DPS blue CP spec out. But if this is just going to be a pure tank and only used for tanking, then you're going to want to go with 100 into Blessed, 100 into Elfborn, and then 40 into Precise Strikes. That just helps out your healing with all of your abilities done. And so the other nodes are really there for DPS purposes, so you don't really need to use them so much. One passive that I do want to point out here is going to be Riposte. When you block a melee attack, you have 50% chance to deal X amount of physical damage to an enemy. It's nice to have for a little bit of additional DPS. You do need 30 points into any of these 4 nodes here, so just like put 30 into Physical Weapons Expert or something, and you get the Riposte passive. That's a potential option there. It's not like absolutely necessary, but it's nice to have a little bit of additional source of DPS there. And then for our red CPs, I like to go with a one-size-fits-most approach, so you don't necessarily need to change your CPs around too much. You might need to change them depending on which content you're running. Generally speaking, tanks, you will be facing off against both physical and magical damage. You take different damage sources compared to DPS and healers in trials, so your CP distributions are going to be a little bit different compared to DPS CP distributions. So we're going to be focusing in on 4 nodes here. So Hardy, Elemental Defender, Thick-Skinned, and Ironclad. So you can basically think of damage as 4 different types. So direct and damage over time, physical, direct damage, and damage over time, magical. Direct damage is obviously going to be more of a concern than damage over time, because a 10k direct damage hit does 10k all in one hit. 10k damage over time over 5 seconds with a tick every 1 second is only a 2k tick. So that's, you can heal through that. You can't necessarily heal through a large direct damage hit. So that's why we put a lot more emphasis on Ironclad compared to Thick Skin with our CP points here. So I have 64 into Hardy, 64 into Elemental Defender, 40 into Thick Skin, 56 into Ironclad, and I do have 31 points into Bastion. That's just to help out our damage shield a little bit. Plus, we get 2 very useful passives. So we get Infusion, which boosts the magical regen for 8 seconds when you resurrect somebody, and Field Position, which reduces the amount of damage you take while you're resurrecting somebody. As a tank, you won't necessarily be resurrecting people all too much. You're just going to be more for your DPS to do, but it is nice to have these passives here just in case you do want to have them. If you don't want to have them, though, you can just take all 31 points out of Bastion, and then redistribute the points accordingly, like so. So you would hit 64 in Hardy and Elemental Defender. You would go up to 66 here. You could do 4 in Thick Skin, and then 1 in Spell Shield or Heavy Armor Focus. So that's how you would redistribute the points there, if you don't want to put any points into Bastion at all. Alright. So that's pretty much it for the build itself. Now let's go ahead and talk about skill prioritization, what you should be doing as you're tanking. So obviously you're going to want to maintain your taunt and everything like that. So Pierce Armor, ranged taunt, whatever you have to do. The next most important thing is you're going to want to make sure to always have Minor Maim on the enemy, and that comes from Heroic Slash. So you can see here up on the upper right next to the health bar, you see Minor Maim. Always want to have that up, because that reduces damage done by the boss by 15%. Plus Heroic Slash does give you Minor Heroism as well, which boosts your ultimate regen. Then you're going to want to try to use your shield whenever you need to have it up. I like to do it every 10 seconds, just so you always have the Minor Intellect boost up. And then when you're starting to run low on Magicka, I try to maintain at least 50% Magicka, so that's when you want to use Balanced. On your back bar, whenever you swap to your back bar, try to keep Deadly Cloak up, so that way you always have the Crusher enchant, chance of getting that Crusher enchant going, because it does proc your Crusher enchant. And plus, it's also useful for the 25% damage mitigation. If you are using Dark Deal, what you're going to want to do when you're timing out Dark Deal is, let's say you're running low on stamina, you need to use Dark Deal. What you're going to want to do is you want to time it. So this is going to involve a little bit of knowledge behind a fight. Generally speaking, though, whenever you block a heavy attack, you do have some time afterwards to do Dark Deal. So you can see here, I'm going to hold block, do Dark Deal, and you can see I actually don't raise my block again until after the cast time is done. So that's what I mean when I say you need to be careful with your timing of Dark Deal. So, you know, if, for example, you're going off against a warrior and he just did his 1,000 cuts, then you can use your Dark Deal and go back to your bar and continue to block. And that's basically how I play a sorc tank there. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.